Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Mark Schroer, and you're listening to the 180 Drums podcast. This is where we speak with some of the world's best drummers, and we take the chance to put them under the microscope and take a look into their world. We have a very cool guest on today, but before I get into that, I want to tell you guys really quickly about a promotion we have going on at 180drums.com. If you head over there, you can get access to a free 1-month trial where you get access to drum lessons from the world's best drummers. And you don't have to put in your credit card or anything. All you got to do is put in your email address and you get access to that for a full month free of charge. Anyways, enough about that. On the podcast today, we have a very exciting special guest. We have the one and only Harry Kangany. Harry's been writing for Modern Drummer for over 20 years. He's an avid drum collector, and I'd even go so far to say as Harry is a drum historian. He's going to get into some really cool topics about some really famous drums and some of the world's most expensive drums. Anyways, hope you enjoy the podcast. With no further ado, please welcome Harry Kangany and Jake Nicole.
Guys, welcome to the 180 Drums podcast. We have Harry Kangany here with us today, and Harry's actually an insurance guy from Indianapolis, Indiana, but he is so much more. Harry has some of the best insight into the drums of the past, and today we're going to jump in to talk about a whole bunch of different things. I'm going to really prod Harry on how he got into insurance, how he's mixed pleasure and passion and work and all these things together to have a life that I think, at least social media-wise, appears pretty pleasing and pretty awesome. Harry, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jake, good to be here. Thanks.
So, give us a little background, man. Insurance, how did that happen?
Well, there was a time I thought I would be a professional musician, and I literally came out of college and thought, I don't think I'm gonna. Nah, maybe I'm not. I'm not. So I started law school and thought, I really don't like this that much. So I left law school and decided I wanted to find something that let me kind of jump around, not sit still all day long doing somebody else's work, but yet I enjoyed the legal side of the law. So after having, 350 job interviews, it really wasn't that bad. It just felt that way. I talked to a guy and joined an insurance company, and I thought, well, I'll stay for 6 months until I understand this stuff. And that 6 months was up, and followed by a number of other 6 months, and this October, I guess, will be my 42nd year in it.
Wow.
So, yeah. So it was the thing that paid the bills and let me have some free time to look into other stuff. And what happened with drums is that on February 9th, 1964, before most of the people that you probably interact with were born, I was 13 years old. I was the right age, and the Beatles came on American TV. And they were on 3 weeks in a row, but from that night, how bad is that? February 9th, 1964, a date burned in my brain.
Wow, that is...
I turned to my mother and said, I want to take drum lessons. I just knew I wanted to take drum lessons. So that's what I did as a kid. I was a kid and grown up, and I played in garage bands, and I, played in different cities and had a great time and studied hard and decided that really music would probably do better without me. I'd rather write. So I'm really a writer at heart. So.
Well, what's amazing is for all you guys listening in the 180 family, what Harry has done so well is truly become a source that people really consistently go to, and that includes Modern Drummer, that includes Not So Modern Drummer. Actually, before we went on air, Harry and I were discussing how Harry's written for so many people at this point that it's hard to remember and keep track of it all. But he does so freely. So, man, thank you for being such a great resource for so many people. We've got a bunch of drums that we're going to discuss today that I'm excited about as well. But thanks for the background. I definitely know what it feels like to, venture a little bit away from drumming and being a gigging drummer as a career. But it's great that you've kept the passion going. So what was it like growing up in that era? in the, just before the mid 60s where you're watching the Beatles take place. What was that moment like?
It was really a magic time. In fact, I don't know of anything else that was like that because it was so much the talk not only of my country. It was, England had gotten going before we did, and these guys came over here. I saw them. That was my first concert. I was 14.
Wow.
It was just electric, and it wasn't just that people started listening to their music. It was that people started cutting their hair differently and wearing different clothes, and words were coming in. They really kind of kicked all the other bands off the front page, and an entire my generation, an entire generation became so affected in a good way by them. I'm still affected. I mean, just let me do an anecdote. About a month and a half ago, I was asked to go in and look at Ringo's first Ludwig drum set. And I don't know if you or your listeners know, but Ringo wanted an American set. He'd been playing at Premiere. There's nothing wrong with Premiere, but in those days, importation had really just started. So they went to London. They found the set, Oyster Black. He bought it, 2012-14. It was sent to him during a rehearsal for a TV show. Anyway, so he played that set from May or June of '63 to February of '64 when they came to the United States, and he got another matching set. He didn't use the new snare drum; he used his old snare drum. But anyway, cut forward to last year, Ringo decided to sell the drum set.
Wow!
So the guy that bought everything but the original snare drum because Ringo kept it. So that guy also bought the drumhead from the Ed Sullivan show. That actually got sold the day before. So imagine a drumhead. Let me do the drumhead story first. The drumhead probably cost $20 back in February of 1964. They bought it. It's a Remo drumhead made in California, shipped to London. It's over there. It's painted with the Drop T logo. It was the second drumhead. They bring cymbals, snare drum over here, buy the drum set, the new drum set, and put the number 2 head on the new drum set. Well, okay, so the number 2 drum head by itself is an interesting story. Ringo's first wife had it. She sold it at an auction years ago for $9,000.
Big mistake.
The guy that bought it had a restaurant in Australia. He took it, stuck it on the wall. And then he sold it in the 90s to a guy in the United States at auction for $44,000. I saw that drumhead for the second time. I guess I saw it was on the Ed Sullivan show, but I saw it live in Pennsylvania in the 90s at a drum show, and I touched it when the guy wasn't looking, and I was laughing to myself, going, I touched Ringo's drumhead. Anyway, so it's an auction in December. It sells for, are you sitting down, Jake?
I sure am. Here we go.
$2,100,000.
Oh, stop!
No, that's true. and then the next day or 2 days later, the 3-piece drum set with stands, with a pedal, with a hi-hat, everything but the snare drum. It sold at auction for, are you sitting down, Jake? $2,100,000.
Oh my goodness!
Well, just so no, I follow all this drum stuff, so I immediately fire off an email to Modern Drummer. Not only do I know where those drums are going to be, I'm going to go in and do a story on them. They go, yeah, sure, fun. I mean, here in the course of a few hours, somebody spent $4,200,000 on Ringo Starr stuff, the stuff that got me going in 1964. Well, anyway, it was a guy in my city bought it.
Get out of here! See, he bought both. Same guy.
Same guy. And he bought some Beatle guitars that were on auction there too. And so the moral of the story is, if you're a billionaire, you can do that kind of thing. And he is a billionaire. And
wow.
I went to his office. He owns a football team that's in my city called the Colts. And he's a young enough guy that he thought it was cool as hell, man. I walked in his office and there they were. So there are 2 upcoming stories at Modern Drummer about the head and the set.
Get out of here.
So then they came back to me and said, would you tune the set? I went, yeah, it's okay. I don't mind tuning the set. I mean, these heads are pretty shot, but I understand why you don't want to change them.
Are you telling me that you were in there, not only, you touched the head before, now you're tuning the drums?
No, I didn't tune them yet. They asked
Okay.
me if I would do it, and I said, sure, I'll do it. And then they said, would you mind putting the drum head that's separate? It was on a half-shell bass drum. This would be drum head 2, to put it on set 1. So you're following me? The second drum head onto the first set. I said, excuse me, but are you crazy? Do you understand there's some hardcore Beatle people out there that will kill me for this?
Oh, my goodness.
And they said, well, would you do it? And I said, well, if you own the head, I mean, I don't know how many heads I've changed in my life. Yeah, that's not a problem. So they're just, worried the head was going to fall apart. And I said, I'm not doing anything until I talk to your insurance agent so that they understand, you've asked me to do this and I can do it.
Smart. Oh, that's so smart. Only something an insurance guy would think of.
I don't do that kind of insurance, but I knew who their agent was. But I said to him, well, okay, now wait a minute. I've done some research since you asked me this. And apparently the first Beatles logo drum head, so the first one, the one that was on the first drum set, it's not on the first drum set. They have a replica. And the hoop and the claws and the T's from the first drum set are not on it. They have exact copies, but they're not the original ones. And so what happened was Ringo loaned the drum set to Paul McCartney.
No.
And McCartney doesn't know, the story was, where the hoop and the claws and the T's are, and the suspicion is that first Beatles drum set is hanging in his studio at his house. So if you read the article, I say in there, okay, everybody, let's get together and go over to Paul's house and get this stuff back.
That's right. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So anyway.
Wow, what a story. Guys, I hope you're picking this up right away, how amazing this is. Sorry to cut you off here. Keep going.
No, it's fun. Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and so I get the opportunity to pick and choose the stories. I mean, after a while, from my standpoint, you can only say, well, yeah, that's a cool drum, and here's what it is. And I still like that, and I still love meeting the people about them, but I also like the kind of different things. I did a story about a snare drum that looked like it was made for the Nazis because it had swastikas all over it, but it was actually the most expensive snare drum Ludwig ever made, and they made it back in the 1920s for a silent movie cowboy, and and he was using the swastika as a Native American symbol for good luck to give to his 3-year-old son. So he spent 6.5 times what Ludwig's most expensive snare drum cost to be able to have this thing made for his son.
Wow.
Well, you cut forward, and it's made of silver. It's solid silver.
Get out of here.
Plated in gold. I mean, no expense was spared.
Yeah, now I was gonna ask you about this drum, and if you don't mind, I'd love to post the pictures of it off your Facebook on the blog for everybody to see this. It is. Are you telling me it's silver and real gold? What's the what level of gold is it? Is it 24 karat gold or?
Yeah, it's 24 karat.
Oh my goodness.
Burnished gold. So it's going to have a satin gold finish, and then it has hand engraving on the hoops, and then it's got sterling silver appointments, including the name Ludwig, on the shell. Sterling silver. There was some incredible number of hours that it took engravers and jewelers to work on the drum.
Now, what's written in this sentence? Because there's a heart that kind of covers 4 of the swastikas. Yeah,
right. The star's name was Hart, but spelled H-A-R-T, and so that in it is the inscription to his son William Hart Jr. from his father for his 3rd birthday in 1925, I think. So.
Wow.
And it's in a bank vault.
Oh my goodness!
I knew the drum existed. I mean, I knew years ago, and I went try to track it down. See, this is what I kind of do in the spare time when everybody else is having a real life. I try to play drum detective and find stuff. So I wrote to a museum, the William S. Hart Museum in Southern California, 20 years before I found the drum, saying I knew this drum existed, and they referred me back to, at that time, Mr. Hart Jr., who was an elderly man who's since passed away. Well, out of the blue, his widow's new husband, wrote me, found the letter that I'd written 20 years ago that had been forwarded to him, and said, "Yeah, you want to know about the drum? We'll tell you about it. We have pictures. It's in a bank vault." And so so I said, "I'm all ears. Tell me." So they told me and sent me pictures, and that was the story. That's the picture.
Man.
Yeah, it's amazing. He had gold snare wires. I mean, this thing had absolutely everything on it, either gold or sterling silver.
Oh, just remarkable. Yeah, I mean, just looking at the pictures now, and you guys got to head over to the blog, head over to 180drums.com/Harry C, and you can check this out. That's HARRY and then a C. Just the fact that it's all along the rim, even the design there, it's just remarkable for its time.
Yep, really was. Yeah, well, what happened? The way the story all started is I owned a drum for a while that Bunny Carlos owns now, and it's called the William S. Hart. It's the William S. Hart drum. It's an inspiration. I'm sorry. It's the inspiration finish. It's a Ludwig had an all gold hand engraved drum, so it's the Black Beauty on steroids.
Wow.
And it's a Triumphant is the formal name of the model. Again, that was $100 drum when the Hart drum with the swastikas on it was $650. But I think what happened is Hart sent somebody into a music store in California to get a drum for his son, and they bought the most expensive thing there, that Ludwig Triumphal, and and I think they sent it back to Ludwig. I think they bought it, and they said to Ludwig, "Yeah, but here's what we want." When Ludwig built the big one, they took back the $100 one, and Bill Ludwig Sr. and then Jr. kept it. And I bought it from Bill Ludwig Jr. in probably about 1989. And then I ended up selling it to another guy, and then he ended up selling it to another guy, and then he ended up selling it to Bunny Carlos. So Bunny has it, and it's correctly called the William S. Hart drum. It's the William S. Hart Triumphant, and then the one that you see, the swastika themed drum, is really the William S. Hart all gold model.
Wow. So do they all, just to make sure I understand this, do they all these other versions do not carry the swastika logo, correct?
No, that was a one-off.
So they have, like, I'm looking at a couple different versions online. I think I'm actually looking at, it almost looks like it might be yours here.
Typically 4-leaf clovers or something like that.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, four-leaf flowers. That's the typical kind of engraving. So the William S. Hart all gold model with the swastikas is definitely one of a kind.
Wow. Yeah, that is just crazy. And yeah, a lot of people don't realize that the swastika logo was, like you mentioned, far prior to World War. The World War, it was...
Yeah. The Native Americans, and I think they found it in Sanskrit. There are a lot of buildings. There are buildings in North America that have swastikas on them, and they didn't have anything to do with the rise of the Nazis. It's just the use of the same symbol.
Now, guys, if you are listening to this, that does not mean that is a logo you should be drawing now anywhere, because it's still going to get you in trouble for sure.
Yeah, it means something else now.
It does. It's unfortunate, because it's actually, it's actually a beautiful logo. It's so visually stunning with how symmetrical it is, and it's such a shame. But wow, man, what a history lesson. Now, when was the first time you bought a drum set that you'd consider, something that you began to collect? Because what a lot of people listening might not realize, and I haven't shared this yet, but I actually own 2 drum sets that I bought from you. I own an 80s Gretsch Nitron Black that I bought, as well as a Rogers Dayton era drum set that I bought.
Cool. So is that Gretsch? Is it a 24, a 13, 16?
Guys.
Black?
How weird is it when this guy knows your drum set? That's correct. That's the one.
That sounded great. That drum set sounded great. I mean, I remember playing that set. The Gretsch, because of the composite nature of their shells, I always thought tuned really well. The bass drums, tom-toms, tuned really well. And I remember playing that set and just thinking, God, this sounds great. But you know what happens, Jake, is,
yes.
Well, I mean, to answer your question, the first time I got a drum set was 1964. I still have that.
Oh, so cool.
And the first time I really got into buying them to collect them, I guess, is 88. But that set I bought specifically to play because, some drums are absolutely pristine. I mean, they are
Yes.
pristine. And you say to yourself, now, wait a minute, can I take this to a bar and feel comfortable with it? Can I tip up?
Oh, no way.
Well, so that Gretsch set I bought to play, and it just absolutely sounded great. And I tend to gravitate towards silver or black.
Yes.
Or silver and black, which is what you get with that with chrome, and then I play a Black Beauty typically for a snare drum. But yeah, that's a great. I'm glad you got it. That's a great set. What Rogers set did I sell you? What color is it?
It was, I believe you call it a marine pearl, or maybe
Yeah.
a bit of an oyster. It was a 24, 13, 16 as
Oh,
well.
that's got the Slingerland tom mount on it.
That's correct. And
Yeah, Setomatic. Yeah.
there you go. I don't know if you would know who Aaron Gillespie is or not. Aaron Gillespie is a drummer who currently plays for Paramore and had a band called The Under Oath. But I actually gave him that drum set and regret it. Regret it far too often.
We all
But
have those stories, man.
That's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, and if Aaron's listening, love you, dude. I hope you're enjoying it. It came from this guy right here. So, Harry, the other thing is I actually there was a
Now,
10-inch.
are you impressed if I tell you I've owned probably 150 or 60 drum sets that I was able to describe the two you were talking about?
That blows my mind so accurately too. You remember the mounts? That is insanity. Now, did you keep the 10-inch tom that came with that kit? I remember we worked at a price and I left behind a 10-inch tom that had the offset lugs.
Oh, that's right. I did do. Well, I have a guy who used to work for me and now works with me, and he's the one I call when I say, okay, really, I've had this too long, I need this to go.
Nice.
So I think what happened was, I think there was a 10 and a 12.
I took 12. I took 12, 13,
Okay.
16.
Perfect. All right, perfect. So did you get the stand then that they were both on?
I did, and I added an 18 as well.
Okay, because the 13 would mount on the bass drum. Didn't we do that? But anyway,
correct. Yeah.
all right. Yeah. He sold the 10 to somebody.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's a shame. I shouldn't have let it go. This is such is life. Actually, I did an interview with a good friend from Craviato Drums just the other day, and he described it. I guess Johnny always says some fish. There's another fish in the sea. You let some of them get away, and that's okay.
Yep.
That's the way it goes.
Yep.
Cool. This is a great history lesson. So you said, in 88 you started collecting. What are some of the drums that you own or the drum sets that you own that you're the most proud of?
Well, gosh, everybody's made great stuff. Everybody's made clunkers.
Sure.
And so, you can find a drum and you can hit it and you can go, boy, I love this. And you can take another one and spend an hour tuning it, detuning it, retuning it, and go, I cannot get this thing to sound goodbye.
Oh, no kidding.
So the snare drums that I probably am fondest of, I have a Black Beauty that belonged to Bill Ludwig II. He was Bill Ludwig Jr. for most of his life. In the last few years of his life, he legally changed his name to Bill Ludwig II. Roman numeral 2. So anyway, I bought 3 drums from him in the 80s. I bought the one that Bunny Carlos has now, the one we discussed. I bought a Black Beauty called the DFS. It has the initials of the original owner engraved on it, and Ludwig never did that, and it shut the line down at Ludwig, and so it became sort of famous on its own. A writer in England referred to it as the king of the Black Beauty. So
wow.
I've kept that. I've been through so many snare drums. I probably have 50 right now. 2.5 years ago, I probably had 125. What happens is I realize what a pack rat I am, and I go, "This is nuts. I'm hoarding again." And
this is the best episode of Hoarders ever.
Other people need to have these things. Oh, I'm not the worst. I'm not the worst.
I said this is the best episode, though.
Yeah,
this would be great.
I got it. So anyway, I probably have about 50 snare drums now. And what happens is when I play live, I end up using 2. I always will play a 6.5 Black Beauty, 6.5 by 14 Black Beauty, and then I use something else, typically a 4 by 14. If it's the Black Beauty's brass, I use a 4 by 14 that's maple. I just like to, I like to do that instead of cross sticking, and so I have all these snare drums that I've experimented with or bought or something. Now, if you ask me, do you have a favorite drum set? I'd say no. But I have a couple favorite manufacturers that I just always tend to gravitate to. There was nothing against that Gretsch set that you have. It sounded great. But at heart, I'm probably a Ludwig guy.
What would change that moment? You know,
I'm a Ludwig guy from the time when their shells were made of mahogany. Mahogany has a deeper sound than maple does. It just does. So I like, and they're doing them again that way, and it's probably because they've heard too many people like me going, these things back in the 60s sounded really good. They were deeper.
Yeah.
I like them. Darker. I like Rogers. Rogers hasn't been around for a long time, but
yeah.
Part of what affects me is the people that I have met over the years. I've known the Ludwigs. I knew the sales manager at Rogers. I called them friends, and I just love that time. So, you plunk me down behind a 65 Ludwig set or a 65 Rogers set, and I'm the happiest guy in the world. Now, that being said, I played everybody's modern brand, and they all make great stuff.
Yeah.
Pearl makes great stuff. Tama makes great stuff. Sonor makes great stuff. Ludwig makes great stuff. DW makes great. They all make great stuff. I just like to play stuff from the 60s. It's just my thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any drums that you feel like stand alone in the present day, whether it's companies or manufacturers?
Well, I think the modern drum making abilities are pretty impressive. You go and you go look at a Radio King from the 30s or 40s, and you might be finding a kind of an egg-shaped shell. You might find an uneven bearing edge. You might find that the snare bed's hardly there, or it's too deep, or it's too wide, because those guys were making them really fast, and there was a lot of human involvement, and that means mistakes. Now with machinery that's there, humans don't touch them as much. And so therefore, these things come right out of the box sounding great. And it's not just the high-end drum companies. I've heard some pretty inexpensive stuff from Asia with good heads on it and even tuning, even tensioning, and they sound pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So I just think everybody's building great stuff. They really are.
That's a great perspective. Yeah. And it's true. We've seen, I think what's exciting now too is seeing companies innovate and begin to use different, I think the stave shell, not that the stave shell is at all an innovation, because the first drums ever made were likely stave drum shells, but where we are today with companies like Craviotto is definitely exciting with the quality of drum and construction and time. Even guys like, are you familiar with Q Drum Co. at all?
I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting that, we're even having some guys experiment using brass as a shell. And I actually played their stainless steel set at NAMM this year and was blown away by the use of the stainless steel and then the maple reinforcement hoops for the bearing edge.
Well, I think what's funny, in a way, is that back when I was your age, this didn't happen. There were no parts. There were no organizations you could buy shells from. I don't even remember ever seeing anything about buying covering material for the longest time. That was an 80s thing. It came about because enough people started making stuff on their own, and the covering company opened it up. If you bought enough sheets, you could get it and stuff. And then we got the middlemen that sell sheets and sell drum parts. It's pretty neat, but really, if you go back to the 60s and the 70s and probably up to the mid 80s, none of that existed. There were no boutique drum companies. Craviotto couldn't have gotten off the ground.
Yeah. Well, it would have been incredibly hard to market. I think we were talking about this in advance with technologies. Nowadays, it's just phenomenal how fast things are growing. And I think that's really exciting because it lends more of a voice to the people, and people who are, don't have a heavy financial backing or a long financial runway to get something off the ground, Well,
and it's also forced the big guys to come back and say, Okay, if you want to mix your shells, we'll do it. Okay.
Right.
Okay, if you want to change the bearing edge, we'll do it. So they have custom work. And maybe the guitar companies led the way when they set up custom shops and the drum companies followed suit. But, when I was a kid, um, lacquer finishes were the low-cost drums. Plastic finishes, wraps, were the high-cost drums. And
Interesting.
then that changed. It flipped, completely flipped. Yeah.
Wow. And I mean, I guess that's because applying a lacquer, especially at that time, would have probably been, I guess it would have been easier. That's why it was priced that way.
I don't know if it was easier. But it was accepted.
Okay.
You didn't have a bunch of choices. There was flat black, flat blue, white, and then a mixture of black and gold or silver and blue. Limited choices. But no, the plastics were the high-end drums. That's how we were trained. And then it was really probably Yamaha that flipped that and made it. No, it's going to be lacquers are the high end, and so yeah.
Huh, very cool. I've also noticed you got this a beautiful Leedy drum that's got your inscription in it. When was that made for you?
Oh, that's actually a Ludwig drum shell with Leedy hoops. John Aldridge has been a friend of mine since I guess it's been about 30 years now, and he engraved a Ludwig 3x13 Black Beauty for me years ago with my whole name, Harry J. Kankany Jr. And so I don't know when it was, sometime in the 90s probably, I found a 13-inch pair of Leedy engraved hoops, Leedy Indianapolis engraved hoops, and I put them on that Black Beauty. I don't play the Black Beauty. I don't want to tear up the hoops. So I don't put my face. I usually put a drum on as my picture for Facebook. And so I just put that on. I put that on, and it was kind of neat. Then it would have my name, and it would say Leedy on it. And I was able to say the best of both worlds or something like that. A new drum with old hoops, a great company, another great company. So
very cool. Now, when's yeah, that's some fantastic insight. What's the kit that you take most frequently when you're going to go out and play on the weekend?
The last one that I played, see, this is the thing. What am I going to play this time? The last one I played probably was, the last one I played was a White Marine Pearl Ludwig set. The one before that was a Silver Glitter Rogers set. As you've discovered, I like 24s. The Ludwig's a 26.
Oh, nice.
But I got a red Sparkle Rogers. It's right next to that. That's a 22, but that's got a matching Dynasonic. The silver Ludwig or silver Rogers has a matching Dynasonic too, but I don't take it. I don't want to have an armed guard standing there watching the drums.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, when it comes to your influences, you're using a 24. You even mentioned a 26. There's got to be some Bonham there. Is that correct?
No, there's probably some big band. Really, more than Bonham.
Okay. So more Buddy Rich.
Oh yeah. I definitely came from that school of thought. When I was 19, I saw Buddy play. I snuck into a bar and I got caught, but I was standing.
That's awesome.
I was standing there and I got shuttled into his dressing room, which was terrible. It was a terrible bar. It was a terrible dressing room, and that poor guy probably put up with a million places like that. But anyway, I was scared to death. His reputation preceded him. I knew he was a phenomenal drummer, and I knew he was kind of a caustic guy, but he was okay. I won't say he was friendly, but he wasn't unfriendly. He was in that middle ground, was sort of like, yeah, kid, hi, fine here. I had a pair of sticks with me, played them in the air, put them back in the bag, handed them to me. I said, that Slingerland Roger set with the Slingerland mount you and I were talking about, that mount had just come out in 1968, and Buddy was advertised with it. And I said, well, what do you think of the mount? And he goes, Tom Mount's a Tom Mount. In other words, kid, could you ask me a stupider question?
Oh.
So I got his autograph on a picture. I still have it in my office, and I left. And my mother picked me up, and she said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I watched what he did, and I heard what he did. I just have no idea how he did what he did.
Yes.
It was like he had 4 arms and 4 legs. I just, it's the kind of episode in my life where I watched him play, and I thought, I need to take up a different instrument. I need to start playing flute or something. This guy is just untouchable. It's untouchable. But I had a great teacher, and he really rode me in a nice way, and I stayed on it, and I was pretty good, and that's why I thought in college maybe I'll go pro. And then I decided, no, I don't think I'm gonna. No, don't think so. Don't think so. I think
What's so smart about your approach, in all honesty, is that had you pursued a career as a musician, you probably wouldn't have afforded yourself the luxury of being able to collect drums.
Well, I was playing one night. I was playing one night with some pros, and I thought we had a rehearsal. And I thought, oh God, they're pros. I'm going to make mistakes all over the place in this rehearsal, and I made a few.
Yeah.
But hell, so did they.
Totally.
It was a wonderful eye opener, and I was okay after that. It was like, well, if they're not any better than I am, what am I worth?
There you go. Yeah.
But this was one of those the grass is always greener conversations. What
Fair.
do you do for a living? I told them da 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 da, and I said, I've often wondered if I should have, stayed with it and played. And they said, oh no, man, look at the car you drive, look at this, look at that.
Right.
I said, okay, all right, you win.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough conversation, and I mean we're in a situation where we're trying to encourage guys to get out and play as much as possible, but choosing the life of a musician is incredibly challenging, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. Even your level of ability doesn't verify, it doesn't provide you the for sure opportunity of having a great gig. Yeah,
I understand, Jake, and a lot of it is who you know.
Yeah.
Who you meet along the way, who helps you, who keeps you from doing something. So yeah, it's a who you know world. I understand. There are an awful lot of great players that never get their chance, and there are some other people that, well, they do get their chance. So
now, who are some drummers that presently you're finding yourself enjoying or really fascinated by? Because I would definitely agree that Buddy Rich in a lot of ways has remained untouchable. I think we've seen people come out with an extraordinary level of ability, but people not quite like Buddy.
He had a genre, and there are people who imitate his genre and do well, and I'm all for that. I think you'd have to ask me if there is it. Did you ever do you see anybody you don't like? Because I've never seen anybody that I didn't walk away from being happy that I was watching a drummer play.
Oh, very cool.
And I mean that. I mean, some guys are technicians. I mean, you take Kenny Aronoff, for example. Now, there's a guy that is a technician, and sometimes you'll never know it because what he does is he lays something down and he doesn't come off of it like Mellencamp didn't want him to.
Right.
Fine. And then other times, Katie bar the door, get your thickest earplugs you've got and stand back about 50 feet because he will blow the room apart.
Yeah.
I mean, a guy like that just is unbelievable. And once upon a time, maybe there were 2 or 3 or 4 phenomenal drummers. The Buddy Rich, the Louis Bellson era, Gene Krupa at the before he got to the end. Well, now there's 1,000 times that number that are just phenomenal because the instrument is wider spread. People have become not only technically able, people are stronger, physically stronger, I think, and the drive is there. I mean, there are so many great players. That's why I say I can't think of one that I don't think is good. I mean,
right.
Regardless of what they're playing. I mean, I've seen people with brushes do phenomenal stuff with brushes. I've seen guys do it with just their hands, and I think, wow, I never even saw somebody play with their hands for the longest time in my life. And I was watching a young guy on Facebook who was using 4 sticks, and I mean, clearly has a marching band background, but he was able to flip sticks 2 sticks. He was flipping while he was playing with 2.
Wow.
And I thought I would need therapy for somebody to help me do that. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was just unbelievable. There was just some phenomenal players.
Yeah. Now, are there any guys that you specifically gravitate towards too? So, say you're looking for some inspiration, and I definitely want to ask you about some of your practice routine, even if even to this day, what you're working on. But are there guys that you'll pull up in YouTube and be like, man, that's a guy I'm really excited frequently to be inspired by?
I don't think so. I think what happens when you get to be my age is you sit and say, okay, now, really, where are you taking the drums from here? So at some point for me, it was, I've become a writer about the instrument more than a player of the instrument.
Ah, right.
I'm the guy who has real fun taking a product apart and putting it back together again and saying, "Oh, look what they did," or let me walk you through what happened with this drum. Let me walk you through the history of the lives this thing went through. We can do that a lot of times now. So I realized that the best thing I could do for the drumming community was not be playing in it, but be writing for it. And so you can go to Modern Drummer, for example, a magazine that's been great to me. You can go to Modern Drummer and you can read product reviews. You can read, inspirational stories about the guys that are playing and the gals that are playing. And then you can find a little human interest story called Collector's Corner, which is about some old drum, some old drummer, some way something was made, or this little story about Ringo's Drumhead selling for $2 million. I mean, that's what I bring to Modern Drummer, is this little human interest story that is kind of a lighthearted thing to have people sort of scratch their heads and go, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that," or "Oh, wow, that's what happened to it." So, the earlier part of the magazine will inspire you, and hopefully I'll get a little laugh at about page 100 when you get back that far.
Right. Okay. Well, and you also mentioned this. I don't know if we talked about this prior to the recording starting, but you said 20 plus years you've been writing for Modern Drummer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started in the 90s. Yeah, and what happened was I had a drum store in Indianapolis called the Drum Center, and I wanted to display great drums there for people, and old ones for people to see, and so and that's how I got to meet John Aldridge, and we knew each other over the phone.
Wow.
This is before the internet, and so there was a phone network of people who were buying old drums, fixing old drums, selling old drums, wanted to talk about them, and so John was kind of the point guy to get everybody together, and through John I met Rob Cook in Illinois, or Michigan rather, and Rob did a videotape about vintage drums, and I was one of the people on it. And I don't know, everything sort of happened at one time. I had started writing for Modern Drummer. They contacted me because they wanted somebody to write about the history, the American history, really, of drums. And so I don't think we sat down to come up with it, but 1920 is really kind of the date. There were fine drums made before 1920, but 1920 really is when we're starting to see the beginning of separate tension. Really, I mean, it was there before, but for the most part, separate tension, so that you could play a 1920 drum today, but you couldn't probably play a 1915 drum today, because it would probably have 6 tube lugs to it at the most, and it wouldn't sound as good as an 8 lug drum that would have been out by certainly 20 to 25. Ludwig at 25, Leedy at 20. And so anyway, the drums of 1920 on, and I sort of made the golden age of it, 1920 to 1969, just saying in that time frame, that's when all these American companies came together. I should say North American companies, because certainly, we did steal George way back from Canada. So, it was North American companies were coming about, because this is where the wood was. The poor folks in Europe were making beech and birch, and the people in the United States were able to get their hands on maple, and mahogany, and walnut was huge at that time in the beginning, and so that's where my storyline started with Modern Drummer over 20 years ago. Let's tell stories about the great drums and the drum companies, and then my book came out called The Great American Drums and the Companies That Made Them, and it was about Ludwig and Leedy and Gretsch and the guys that got this thing really going.
And where can people pick that book up if they're interested in finding it?
Well, they're going to have to call Modern Drummer, because it's out of print, and they didn't want to make a third copy. So one time it became an ebook, and I believe there's a plan to make an ebook of it again. I mean, that they brought that up, and I said, really, I ought to go in and make a second. We ought to edit some of this, because we have more information than we did in 1996 about some things, and nobody's jumped up and said, yeah, why don't you why don't you do that? But anyway, it's supposed to come out as an ebook again, and there are a lot of pictures in it so people can identify the models and stuff. And I never looked at it as anything more than kind of my tribute, let's call it, to some unsung heroes, because we know Bill Ludwig's name, and we know U.G. Leedy's name, and we know Mr. Slingerland, H.H. Slingerland's name, but we don't know all the people that work for them. There are some nice little men and women that worked in those companies that built their heart out, making a living, making drums. And so the story is as much about them as anything else, and it was like, look at what they've made. Isn't this cool? And it lasts. I said to Bill Ludwig, I asked Bill Ludwig one time, when you were making these things, how long did you expect them to last? He goes,
that's such an interesting question.
Well, think about this now. These guys are going out and they're spending $2,500, $3,000, $3,500 to buy Black Beauties. And how long did you think they were going to last? He goes, a year? And I went, a year? He goes, yeah, we wanted the pros to beat them to death and then come back and buy a new one. Well,
that's a true old sales model.
Makes sense. Yeah. I said, all right, so you're surprised that some of these things have lasted this long. Yeah. He was with me one day years ago, 20 years ago. I spent $100 to buy a 1962 Ludwig catalog. And he goes, you spent how much? I said, it was $100. And he goes, oh my God, I used to have to throw those away by the carload. They'd print the next catalog and get rid of the ones before it. And I laughed and I said, yeah, see, man, you had a fortune here. You just should have put them in a warehouse.
That is too funny. Things you cannot predict.
Right, you can't foresee.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like investing, right? You're taking a chance on paying to keep all that stuff somewhere, and it might be worthless. Or, as you just exposed, it might be worth quite a bit of money. But, supply and demand as well. Who knows how, if you had 1 million copies of it, it would change the...
Oh, yeah. And if they ever come up with time travel, by all means, go back and buy every Black Beauty you can get your hands on. Go back and buy every Radio King you get. Go back and talk Billy Gladstone into making twice as many drums and take them with you. I mean,
yeah. There you go. I think if I could go back in time, I would likely invest in other things to make a fortune. But it's true. I mean, in terms of with the fortune that you could make, the drums you should purchase would be the Black Beauties and the Radio Kings. It's just crazy.
And the Woodshell Dynasonics.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Way cool. Yep. This has been so insightful. I mean, what I think is so amazing is that you have such a giving heart. I mean, you're so interested in contributing just because you love it so much. And I hope that everybody listening takes a couple things away. They take away the fact that you're as passionate as you are. And I think the other thing that really inspired me that you were just sharing is that you recognized your place. And just because you felt like drumming wasn't the thing that was your, necessarily your calling or your place within the industry, you found a way to contribute massively as a writer. And that's, catapulted you into relationships that as a player, you would have had a really difficult time forming. So that to me is really inspiring. And I think that's a great entrepreneurial perspective to pave a way and to build a reputation.
Well, thanks. That's very kind. I kind of have the detective gene. I want to, find stuff and I want to write about it and record it so that people, will know about it later. And that's very rewarding to me. So if any of your listeners have some sort of drum question, they can find me on Facebook. I get stuff every day of my life. Somebody's writing me and they want to know, and I'm always glad to answer because I've got a pretty substantial library I've collected over the years of catalogs and source material. But I know what it's like to wonder, is this worth anything, or should I, should I get it, or should I pass, or what happens if they put a different strainer on it, or blah 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 blah. So or I can't find a strainer. What should I do? That's one of my favorites. Oh, I've got the answer for you. If you have the great old snare drum and you don't have the right strainer and you want to play it. So, if any of your listeners want to write me on Facebook, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'll make sure that in the show notes everything's linked there. And I guess one of my last questions would be: is there any columns that, when you reflect on 20 years of writing, are there a couple that you could pinpoint and say, man, that was a really special story. That was something that I'm very particularly proud of?
Somebody asked me. I'll answer that in the second line of this answer. Somebody asked me recently if I could send them an article that I wrote years ago, and I said, and this is true, I don't keep them. I mean, I've got magazines here that I'm in, probably, and other magazines that my articles aren't in. So I guess I keep them from the standpoint that I keep all the Modern Drummer issues that are published, but I don't have them cataloged. I don't have them framed, because, I can remember what I wrote. I can remember what I think about something. And I do have source material to go back there. Now, to answer that, probably the story that sticks out the most to me is the story about the William S. Hart drum that we talked about, the one with the swastikas on it. Only because it's a one-of-a-kind. It's worth $300,000.
Wow.
Will it ever sell? I don't know. I don't know if it'll ever sell, but I will tell you that there was fun in tracking it down, and it took 20 years. And in doing the story, I kept the politics completely out. It almost didn't get published because one of the advertisers for the magazine was afraid to have a story with swastikas in it, thinking that people wouldn't read the story. They would just have a emotional reaction to the swastikas and seeing the pictures. So I went to the Jewish Defense League. I'm not Jewish. I went to the Jewish Defense League and said, would you have a problem with me doing a story about this? Because I don't want to offend anybody. And they came back and said, no, that's just the whole point. The swastika was hijacked by the Nazi Party. And so I just went back to Modern Drummer and said, listen, if they don't have a problem with it, you shouldn't have a problem with it. Give the people a chance to read and learn. Now, I can tell you that there was great reaction through the magazine, at least that I saw. The only negatives I saw were people who made comments on Facebook who never read the story. They just saw a picture on my page and would make a crack. And then there'd be all these people coming in,
swarming them. Yep.
Yeah, defending it, going, well, you didn't read the article, and here's what the article says, and blah blah blah. Take this as a moment to learn. Nobody was mean. Nobody called anybody names. It was just I understand you have a visceral reaction. Let me help you through it so that this is a teachable moment.
That's great. Oh, man, such wisdom.
That story sticks out the most, probably.
Yeah, it's funny. I had that first thought right away. As in posting this, I was trying to think of the article that will go with the podcast, and my immediate thought was, man, is it too much to take that picture of that drum and use it as the header image, right? It's such you said it perfect. It's such a knee-jerk reaction, right? It's so ingrained in the way we want to react to.
And Modern Drummer was, and rightfully so. They were concerned about it because on the one hand, magazines need readers and they need advertisers, and on the other hand, they had me pushing them, going, "This is the most expensive drum ever made. The story of this drum has got to get out. It's got to get out, and you guys need to do it. It needs to come through this magazine. It's not a Facebook I tease on Facebook. I'll say, I'll show a little piece of a drum with a story coming or something." And so I showed the snare wires, and I showed some other things as teasers leading into it.
I recall, yeah.
And God bless Modern Drummer. They stood up and said, you're right. We're going to do it. And they did it.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Not to mention what it must have felt like. I mean, describe that feeling to us. 20 years trying to get the story on this. When you finally heard back and you realized it was going to, become a reality, walk us through that. What did that feel like?
Well, it was an email that came in, and the second husband of the lady whose first husband had the drum made for him said, I don't know, they were, and they were great people. They were, cleaning it or something, and found my letter from 20 years before. And honestly, I laughed out loud. I laughed out loud when I got there, and I stood up and said, I knew it. I knew it. I knew that drum existed. I knew it. And then I found the Ludwig did a special issue of the Ludwig drummer. It didn't go to the public. It went just to Ludwig dealers, and it had the pictures and the story of that drum in it.
Come on.
I got a copy of it, and yeah, I mean, they talked about how many hours went into it and stuff. And it was just an amazing story. Now imagine this. Okay, Jake, imagine this. You own a music store. I don't know who's the wealthiest movie star you can think of. Or think of a movie star right now. Anybody?
Sure. Say Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise walks into your music store and says, "Jake, I have a 3-year-old son. My wife and I are getting divorced. I want to give my son the best in the world. Cost is no object." And you come back and say, "Well, it's going to be silver. It's going to be gold. We're going to have it engraved. We're going to have sterling silver appointments on it, and the cost of it." Now, you think of what the most expensive snare drum in the world is right now. If somebody wanted something new, and I don't know what it would be, but let's say you get a Craviato, and it's 10 grand. Okay, so imagine that. So Tom Cruise comes into you, and you say, "Well, the most expensive snare drum on the market right now is $10,000, Mr. Cruise. To do what you want will cost $65,000."
Wow.
It was 6.5 times the cost of the most expensive.
Wow.
But the difference is in the terms now of what gold and silver are worth. It's $300,000.
Oh,
so
my goodness,
imagine
yeah.
Tom Cruise going, $300,000, Jake, not a problem. I'll write you the check. And it must have been that kind of moment in that music store in Los Angeles when that happened.
Oh, that is just unbelievable. Not to mention, I do got to say that having selected Tom Cruise as the actor, I would not be surprised if he came in and said he was you mentioned getting divorced? Yeah. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. Sorry, Tom, if you're listening.
If you decide to Google William S. Hart, what you'll read is he was a Shakespearean actor, and then he became a silent cowboy star, but he was from New York. Okay, so he gets out west, and he gets buys a mansion, and he fills it full of American Indian art, Native American art, blankets, Remington bronze statues, and so forth. Money is no object. That's when income tax was 3%. Money is no object. So he marries a much younger woman, and it doesn't work out, and they have a baby. And so by the time the little guy was 3, the parents were divorced, and I'm sure he just did whatever he wanted to do for that little guy, and that's one of the things. Yeah.
Oh, man, what a story! What a story! Well, listen, this has just been it's been such a treat. I think that like I said, everyone needs to pick up on your passion, because it's just you could not love what you do more, and it's such an honor to have you on the show. Such an honor. We're gonna have to pick your brain in the future, my friend.
Jake, very kind, and I'm so glad that you reached out to me. And I will tell you honestly, I think with very few exceptions, I mean, I can say this. I used to say I never met a drummer I didn't like. I guess I have met a couple of them I maybe didn't care for. But 99.9% of the drummers I've ever met in my life have just been swell people. And I'm glad to talk, glad to hang out, share stories. Everybody's got stuff in common. You pick up your sticks and you learn to set up equipment and take it down and move it, and sometimes you're exhausted and you can sit around and laugh about the band stories, the thing that went wrong, the bad rehearsal, the great practice, the great rehearsal, the bad, the time you played out live, and we all have such wonderful stuff in common. And the glue is we all love these drums. We just love the drums, and they speak to you from in this case across the internet, but they speak to you and bind you together with a whole bunch of great people. It's fun, and I thank my parents for getting me started there in 1964, and my teacher, who looked at me because all I wanted to do was learn rock and roll, like I had 3 eyes, and we were able to find a happy medium where I'll study that if you'll teach me this, kind of thing, and it worked out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Way too cool. Well, listen, I appreciate it so much. I think you're so right. I think the only time drummers in this present generation might feel like there's not that sense of community is because people hide behind names online and, will leave disparaging comments. But I think you're right that when it comes to face-to-face interactions or telephone interactions with other drummers, there's no way not to geek out and have a good time.
They jump in, they help each other. Somebody's sick, somebody takes their place. I mean, it's just great stuff. Great stuff.
Absolutely. So before we let you go, Harry, here's the last question. If you could send a letter to everybody in the world, they're going to receive it, it'll be translated into their language, and you just want to share one statement to them, what would you want to share with everybody?
I tell them to go out and make music.
Oh,
Nobody gets along as well as they do when music's involved. Music is the universal language. Go out and make music. If you can do it, man, go do it. Go do it today.
Harry, this has been amazing.
Well, I'm glad you called. So call me anytime now that I got this technology all figured out.
That's right. You got it.
Okay, Jake.
There you go, guys. Big thanks to Harry for being on the podcast today. If you're interested in seeing some pictures of those really old, expensive drums that Harry's talking about, head over and check out the show notes at 180drums.com/Harry C. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast this week. If you did, go rate us, tell a friend. If you didn't enjoy the podcast, definitely check out next week's podcast because we might just be interviewing your favorite drummer. All right, that's it for this week. Stay tuned, and we'll talk to you guys next week. See ya.